Do you ever spend hours practicing slap bass, but make such little progress that you start to hate it? Let's admit it, sitting down to practice and feeling the dread of spending hours practicing exercises and getting nowhere sucks. So in this video, I'm going to show you why you're procrastinating before you practice and how to beat it for good, the worst bad practice habit that's sabotaging your progress and how to fix it, and how to stay motivated and consistent with your practice, even on days when you don't want to pick up the bass. So why do we procrastinate before we practice? And what's the best way to beat it? Have you ever been to a beach and put off getting into the water because it looks really cold? Now, if I was at this beach, yes, I would do exactly the same. But here's something interesting. Imagine for a second you are on this exact beach. Given how it looks, how do you feel about jumping into the water? Because it looks really sunny and really nice and pleasant, I'm sure you'd waste no time at all in getting in and starting to swim around. Here's the interesting thing. Why would you take such a long time getting into the water on this beach, but then happily dive straight into the water on this beach? Cut a long story short, diving into the water on this beach would just make you feel better. But what's this got to do with procrastinating before we start trying to practice slap? Well, it's often said that the hardest part of any job is actually getting started, and practicing slap is certainly no different. We've all been there. We tell ourselves that as soon as we get home from work, we're going to pick up the bass and spend 2 hours practicing our favorite songs. We're going to smash out all our technique exercises. Then we're going to phone our friends and organize a band rehearsal and book in some gigs. Instead, the thought of actually doing all this stuff is really overwhelming, and we put it off by procrastinating. So if you want to avoid this procrastination trap, here's what you have to do. The next time you're going to practice, get your bass out of the case, sit down and start playing your first exercise as soon as you possibly can. Just as we established with the beach example, it's often the thought of doing something that actually determines our own willingness to do it. And the thought of doing something and the actual reality of doing it are often very different. Of course, when we think about it, we'd much rather swim in this beach. But in reality, this one might have warmer waters. This one might be infested with jellyfish. So this is the first way you can practice when you really don't want to. Break the ice as fast as you possibly can. This won't give your procrastination and self-doubt time to set in, and it will make you mentally engaged, so your thoughts shift from, oh God, this is going to be horrible, to, this is awesome, I really want to do more. But now there's another problem. What if you're already practicing regularly, but feel you're not making progress? This problem is actually the cause of the worst possible practice bad habit, and I can almost guarantee that it's completely sabotaging your progress. Luckily, however, there's actually a very simple solution to this, and I'm going to explain it using Lego! It has been bloody years since I've done this. So in this example, this Lego house represents an actual house that a construction crew would build. And me building it in front of you with all these different pieces represents the process the construction crew would go through as they build it. Now, this image on the front of the box is crucial because this represents what we would call a long-term goal. Eventually, they want to build a house that looks like the one on the front. But in order to get there, they have to split this whole task up into a load of smaller tasks that they can complete, which will get them here. So first, they might lay some foundations. Now, I know this is a tea towel, but I couldn't find Lego foundations on Amazon, so just bear with me. Next, they might have to build a wall. Then they might add some windows. Then they might add the roof. And they would keep going in this bit by bit fashion until their long-term goal was completed. Now, what's this got to do with sabotaging your slap-based practice sessions? Well, imagine how stupid it would be if the chief construction worker turned up one day to the construction site, then said to the rest of the construction team, yeah, what you've done so far, pretty good, but the trouble is you put in a day's work, doesn't look like how our end goal is supposed to look, so you know what, scrap the whole thing, we'll call it off. You sure, boss? We're making pretty good progress. I mean, I think this is actually looking pretty good. If we just keep going, nah, do you know what, not there, not looking like the end product, scrap it, sack it off, it's not worth it. Right. Cool stick. Thanks. Now, the sad thing is, this is what the majority of bass players do every single time that they practice. They set themselves a good long-term goal, such as, I want to master a slap stroke in the next week, but then they compare the work that they've done in a single day, or sometimes a single practice session, to the finished article, to how their long-term goal should look in the end. And when they realize that the two don't match up, they feel like they've fallen short, so they quit, and all their progress is sabotaged. This is tip number 2. Stop comparing the end result of a a day's practice to your long-term goal, because it always dooms you to failure. This is why you feel like you're getting nowhere, and it is a trick that you absolutely have to stop playing on yourself. But this does bring up a really important problem. To reach a long-term goal, you've obviously got to stay consistent. So what's the best way to make consistent practice easy? And how can you stay motivated to practice on the days that you really don't want to? This next tip I'm going to show you is a complete game changer. It's one of the most powerful practice hacks I've ever learned, and it's also one of the easiest to implement. So, what is it? When I was a kid, I saw this bass in a music shop and I really wanted to buy it. Now, the Tipex names weren't part of the original design. These are all actually done by school friends that signed it for me on the last day of school. Very cool memories. Anyway, I really wanted the bass, so my parents actually made me a deal. They said that they would buy it for me now, but I had to pay them back in weekly installments with the money I have from my part-time job, and I had to do that until the bass was paid off. Needless to say, we obviously had a deal. And to keep track of the payments, what I did is I made a small chart that I stuck onto the fridge at home. I wrote the total amount at the top, which was £300 if I remember right. And then each week when I came home from my job, I would make a payment. One week I would pay £20, then £30, and then £20 again, and so on. And after a few weeks of making payments, I noticed something really curious. I couldn't wait to get back to work, make more money, and make the next payment. I even took extra shifts at my job, and it didn't matter if I was tired, if I was sick, if I'd had a long week at school. The fact is I was getting more and more motivated to make these payments, and I was working harder and more consistently to get it done. But here's the really interesting thing. By the time I'd paid off the bass, I hadn't missed a single payment. Now, wouldn't it be great if we could apply that same kind of motivation and consistency to our own slap bass practice? Well, we can. And the secret that unlocks this kind of motivation and consistency, it's also one of the easiest things in the world to implement. Now, this is something I've actually built into the practice routines that come as part of my slap bass workshop, so link below in the description if you want to get more info and check it out. But in short, if you want to put your own practice motivation and consistency on overdrive, do this. The key to this incredible consistency is actually in the chart. You see, each week when I made a payment, I would come home, write it on the chart, and subtract it from the total amount that was left. So on days when I felt like I was never going to get there and pay the bass off, I could look at the chart and be reminded of all the weeks of hard effort I put in, all the progress I'd made, and I could see all of that within a single glance. Yes, progress on the bass can often be slow. It can be so slow that we don't notice it. But if we track our practice using a tracker or a diary, we can look back at that same diary and then realize, oh, I've actually practiced 18 days out of this month. That means I'm pretty consistent. However, there is still one huge problem. Now that you know how to keep yourself motivated and avoid the worst slap bass practice traps out there, you need to know what skills, techniques, and exercises to practice so that you can action everything that you've learned in this video. So click up here and watch this next video, because it is finally time to fix your slap bass technique for good.